Stephen, what was your relationship with Neil Gaiman's The Sandman before you were approached about being involved in this series?
Well, because I had a relationship with Neil, I knew Neil, and when you know a famous writer, it's kind of rude not to read some of their works. And I'd already read American Gods for some reason. That's the one I'd read, and that was, I suppose, because it was a book, and I was not familiar really with writing. With reading and writing of graphic novels, and I sort of felt they were for other people but not for me. But then when I did this movie ages ago, V for Vendetta, and I remember once in the Ivy in London, this restaurant, Neil told me to join him. I was with a couple of people and I was just leaving, and I suddenly noticed Neil there with this figure with enormous hair called Alan Moore, this remarkable writer who wrote V for Vendetta, and he had not been on the set of the film at all, and had made it very plain that he disapproved of the film, and he disapproved of all. I mean, he wrote The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That was the one he hated most, but also Watchmen. He wrote, didn't he? And he didn't like the film version of that. But anyway, that's when Alan, I think, said to me, "Have you read Neil's Sandman?" And I said, "I don't think I have." He said, "You should." I said, "I read American Gods." He said, "Read Sandman." So kind of the next week, I think, out of duty, I did. And then occasionally I'd see Neil and was aware that he was hoping one day the Sandman might come to some sort of fruition as a filmed entertainment piece. But he was pretty certain that it had to be TV. You know, you couldn't reduce it to a 100-minute film or a 300-minute film, as cinemas seem to have to show these days, not mentioning Batman. But it really, everything came together, the golden age of television, it's called, and there's a good reason for it. I think it is just people are taking more risks, they're daring to do things at a greater length and a greater depth, they're not insulting the audience's intelligence, rather quite the opposite. And they're providing entertainment for a variety of people. So there is, there's an expectation now that when you approach something like The Sandman, it's got to have the same ambition as the graphic novel. In other words, it must be compendious. The whole of humanity must be represented, and that means queer and genderqueer and racially diverse and all kinds of, because it's about us all. And so I was kind of aware that the Sandman couldn't be made until a period when all those things came together. A sense of how things can be made this way is both technical and aesthetic, I think. And so it's, anyway, brilliant. It's brilliant time for this kind of thing.
And coming to it as a queer viewer, I was particularly delighted by how many LGBTQ plus characters there are in the series and how they kind of unfold, and none of them are defined by their identity, and they also don't have to be nice people necessarily. They can be flawed. And what did you sort of make of that when you were watching the whole thing? I know you've seen the whole thing as well.
I love that. I love the subtlety with which, for example, the killingly handsome Boyd Holbrook as the Corinthian could give the glad eye or receive the glad eye on the beach with John Cameron Mitchell, and one's thinking, no, because he'll suck your eyes out. And but then with the figure in the convention he picks up, and they slams him up against a wall for a good kiss, and then helps him get murdered. So everything flashes between and it's charmingly done. It's not self-conscious in the same way that all the characters fit their roles with such perfection. They so exist within, whether they're a character from The Dreaming or whether they're a character from so-called real life. They don't apologize or pretend to be anything other than what they are, and I think that's just something that's always thrilling to watch.
Yes, and I think probably when the original comics came out, and I'm thinking about when I was growing up, there being such little LGBTQ plus representation,
Yeah.
and I remember watching Peter's Friends with my dad at the cinema, and I was kind of quite young at the time, and that was one of the first times at the cinema where I'd seen a queer character that was sort of, and the friends were all fine with it, and that kind of thing. But I think sort of back then there was a degree of these characters have to be positive, especially as far as the community is concerned, whereas
in my case it had to be, unfortunately, it had to be HIV positive.
Yes.
In Peter's Friends, and that was still part of the legacy of any kind of queer story. Is going to be about suicide, death, disease, rejection, unhappiness, stigma, and of course all those things were true in that they, a lot of LGBTQ plus people faced all of that. But how wonderful to live in an age where now we can be part of the world as well, that our story is one of acceptance and relationships, marriages, as well as all the old, pickups and other such things. So, yeah, we do live in a richer time for us, don't we? There's no question.
And what did you particularly relish about playing Gilbert, your character in The Sandman?
Well, I like the fact that he was an amiable soul, kindly disposed, and very enthusiastic about his little short time on Earth, trying to understand human beings. And I loved having this relationship with Rose, with Vanessa, who's a wonderful actor and a delightful company. And we just we paired off from the first in a very happy way. And it's a surprising pairing. You don't often see a big fat old man and a smallish girl together in that way, kind of exploring the world or helping each other out and so it was just a really pleasant kind of role. I was glad not to have to be a god in a heavy way, to be and that's one of the things that's so clever about Neil and his storytelling. I just loved how, for example, death is such she was so nice. She was lovely. And why wouldn't death be nice? We also have to assume it has to be a skeleton with a bony hand on the shoulder and a gleaming scythe, and all this nonsense. But actually death comes to us all, so it might as well be friendly, I'm afraid it is your time. Let's go, shall we? Yeah. I'm so sorry. Off we pop. And the way she just walked around West London there, occasionally having to collect someone, I thought that was delicious. And I there's so many bits that make you go, wow. The standalone scene in the diner, the episode in the diner, is a masterpiece. I mean, it's just extraordinary. It recalls the best days of the Twilight Zone plus, real power to it. And it's a real question that has been asked in films before. Jim Carrey's Liar, Liar is about someone who is given the curse of having to speak the truth, and it's a comedy. But in this case, people are suddenly freed to tell the truth, and there's nothing but, in the end, but blood and guts and murder. And it's a grim way of looking at the world. But then the darkness and comedy of a convention and a hotel of serial killers. I mean, how extraordinarily dark is that? And you think, is it a bit irresponsible just to think that they're funny? But of course, Neil has a moral twist to it. And in episode 10, they are made to face who they are. And that's a marvelous moment, isn't it? Quite extraordinary. And again, like so much, not too much is made of it. And one of the things I so admire about the storytelling is how graceful it is. And so there is one of the serial killers puts a gun to his mouth and kills himself, but it's a quick thing and you see Rose going, oh, well, that was not nice. And then she drives off. It's not like, oh, close up, sobbing. It's just, you get it and you move on. It's really, it's extraordinarily skillful.
treats the audience with intelligence, emotional and cerebral. Yes, I think. Yes. And of course, you're already part of the Netflix family with being the voice of Headmaster Barnes in Heartstopper. Why was that something that you wanted to be involved in?
How could I not? Well, you know, when they were in touch with me and said, it's nothing really, it's just a voice. I said, well, I do voices, I don't mind. And what is the show exactly? And they said, it's set in a school. And then I got sent a little bit of script and I said, oh, but this is, wow. I think anybody queer who's watched it will say, oh, if only that was around when I was 12 years old. It would have changed my life to have seen a story told in that way. Because we were just wrapped up in our own mixture of shame, guilt, excitement, hope, you know, all the feelings growing up that, well, this was in the 70s, way before you were born, but, you know, I bet even young as you are, that you probably felt the same. Gosh, I would have valued that when I was young. So to be a part of it is a great honor and a great pleasure.
Yes. Well, I was born in 77, so I had Section 28 sort of looming over for a lot of my school days. Yeah. And It's a Sin was such a cultural phenomenon in the UK. I live here in New York, and just to watch the impact it had, and it really felt like a watershed moment for some of that stigma against sort of HIV and AIDS sort of start to being addressed at the very least as well. So what did it mean to you to be part of that series?
Well, I mean, again, when Russell called me up and asked if I would play this role, I was utterly entranced by it. I mean, just knowing what a great writer he is. I've always admired his work and just been amazed by his productivity and his passion and his depth and, you know, everything about him. And he was very honest and said, you know, nothing has meant more to me that I've ever written than this. This is everything to me. And I said, well, once I'd read it through, you know, gallons of tears. I mean, reading the script, let alone when I watched it, but reading it, because it you know, I came out in every sense, really, from university in 1981. I arrived in London with my friends at exactly the same time as the virus arrived. So I remember all those details that he put in it. Have you heard about this weird flu they're getting in San Francisco? They're calling it like a bathhouse flu. I'm going, what? That doesn't sound right, really. Was it like a bird flu or something? I'm not sure. You remember that bathhouse flu I was telling you about? Apparently it's quite a bit more serious. It's like a cancer or something. Cancer? Yeah, and you catch it and it's mostly gay men in America. So it'd be ridiculous. How can the disease know whether someone's gay? And then a few months later, suddenly you're hearing more and more about it. And suddenly there are a few notices going up in the bars and the clubs. And some people, exactly as he told it, some people are pulling them down because they're a buzzkill. And other people are, you know, putting them up again. And I remember going with friends to Hampstead Heath with boxes of Mates, which were the free virgin condoms that were being given away at the time. And I would stand there on the edge of the heath as people were going in, because in those days, the heath, I mean, you couldn't hear yourself for the sound of belt buckles hitting the ground and bushes rustling, and saying, oh, hi guys, if you're going to do this, could you take one of these? Fuck off, darling. Or they go, oh, bless you, can I take a handful? You know, all the different attitudes and whatever. And very quickly stopped being funny, or you know, it became horrible how many people. You know, there was a place called the Broderick Ward in the hospital that's now been pulled down. That was in Mortimer Street, and that was the major AIDS ward in London. And I remember you'd go there and you'd see parents sitting on the edge of beds with skeletal sons who were going to die, and were going to die horribly, and were already dying horribly. But then on the other side of the bed might be their lover who was well, their partner. And the parents had their backs to them, literally. So there were two sets of people on the bed with their backs to each other, not speaking. The parents thinking, you gave this to my boy. But on other beds, the parents were making new relationships with the surviving partner. And some of them were in denial. Do you remember the Scottish guy who was burning his son's clothes in It's a Sin? Someone like that, really fucked up about it. And other ones, their sons died, and they then went into the movement, as it were, and visited the hospital every day after their son had died, and visited new patients, and befriended the doctors, and worked in activism, and went to Parliament. So it was how you couldn't tell how people were going to respond to a crisis like that, especially when it touches you personally. But I went to too many funerals, and I was very fortunate because two reasons really. One was I was absolutely convinced that no one would ever be interested in me. And I hated gay pubs and bars because of that, being raked with the eyes as you come in, and everyone just turning and looking at you and then immediately turning away again and thinking, oh God, I hate this. And because I hate dancing and I hate that sort of, stuff. And also because my career was taking off, and I was just so thrilled because it was a career involving writing as well as performing. I was so busy, I literally didn't have time. But my best friend, the next lover from university, he became HIV positive very early, and dozens of people died. And so, yeah, to have someone write it up properly like that was a great gift to the community, and I hope to young people as well, that they will learn from it. And as it so happened, we filmed it in December 2019 and January 2020, and I think about 6 weeks after the final wrap, Boris Johnson appeared to go, oh yeah, this coronavirus 19 seems to be quite serious. And suddenly we were in lockdown. So it was very good timing in some ways.
Yes, well, an incredible piece of television, as in the Sandman, as is the Sandman, and it's in a different way too. So, Stephen Fry, delightful to chat to you.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you. Thanks for your support. Absolute delight. All the best. Good luck.
And to you. Thanks, Stephen.
But not in a gay bar. Bye.